Hello, all. Welcome to this session on defense research. I'm still going to wait a few minutes, let's say 2 minutes, before we start the session to give everybody the chance actually to call in into the session. So stay with us and we'll be starting the session soon. Hello all, I propose that we start the session. Since I see quite a nice amount of people has already called into to this session. So my name is Peter Schelkens. I'm affiliated with the Department of Electronics and Informatics of VUB, but I'm also chairing the Ethics Committee on Dual Use, Military Use and Misuse of Research. And together with my colleague Alexander Matelaar, we will be actually moderating this session and also providing you a few presentations on defense research at the university. But before we start with our presentations, I would like to inform you as well that you can ask questions during these sessions. You will find on top of your Teams interface normally a Q&A button. If you click this Q&A button, you should be able to formulate a question. The other participants can also vote on questions that have been posted so that we can also see which questions are attracting actually most of the interest. So please, while we're giving the presentations, feel free to formulate your questions already. We're going to address them at the end of the two presentations because there might be some answers that are given during the presentation, and so we want to kind of avoid that the question round or the first question round after the first presentation is already going to eat part of what is going to be told in the second presentation. So while we're giving the first presentation, the second one, which will be particularly focusing on defense research opportunities, will be given by my colleague Alexander Matelaar. Good. So we thought it would be a good idea before really diving deep into the defense research issues to first also explain to you what actually the focus is of the Ethics Committee on Dual Use, Military Use and Misuse of Research. And so I'm going to start with that part first. And so you should be able to see the presentation at this moment. I also would like to inform you that this presentation is actually merely based on a document that was published by de Vlier, which is in Dutch, de Vlaamse Interuniversitaire Raad, or in English, the Flemish Inter-University Council, which is also looking into these issues and try to come up actually with a common approach across the different institutes. So in that sense, also the approach that we are following here at the VUB is in that sense not very different from what our colleague universities are doing in Flanders. Now, before starting this, it's maybe good also to actually put some definitions on paper. First one is actually what is a dual-use item. So typically we understand under a dual-use item materials, fabrics, techniques, and so forth, which can be used for both civil and military purposes. So that doesn't mean that that when you're running into a research project, that the project would never, by default, mean that you would always have both civil and military purposes. In most of the cases, you will have a civil purpose, but you have to be aware, of course, that there could be military purpose as well, and take the appropriate actions. Hence, also the reason why there is so much attention spent on dual use. Another aspect is the misuse, actually, of those research results. Misuse, we define it that you're using those results actually for unethical purposes, and so you have to also screen the work that you're doing and the partnerships that you have, that you do not have a conflict with this aspect. And now finally, there is the military use. It's probably the easiest to explain. Basically, that is research which has as primary application military topics. So that's easy to find the classification. And it's also important to know that this kind of projects by default always requires a screening by the ethics committee. Now, it's also important to understand that we do not have a lot of formal lists of the dual-use items and of ethical obligations and so forth. So typically, there's a kind of interplay between legal and ethical obligations, and that's also why there is actually a committee that looks into this, because this can be quite complex. So a lot of angles you have to look at this problem, and so this ethic committee has also as purpose actually to support the researchers in this context. Now, notwithstanding that, it's also important that you understand that as a researcher, that you are actually best placed to make those assessments in terms of, okay, what is the type of technology and topic I'm working on, okay, and to assess, okay, where it could be used. So it is actually your personal responsibility also to look into this and inform a report to the appropriate ethics committee or one of the contact points in the other departments. So when you are planning to submit a research project, typically you are in touch also with the R&D department, TTO office, or with IRMO. And so it's also a responsibility, if you think there is an issue, to discuss this with them. And so that's important to realize this. The initiative in principle is with the researcher, and it's also important to do that timely, but I will come back to this later on. Now, what are the criteria we are typically looking at? Well, there is at one side that is, of course, the item itself. What is the topic on which you're going to work? And what are potential regulations that are related to that item? What is the trajectory actually that the research results will follow, or that the product that you're creating will be following? And what is the potential end use? I say explicitly potential end use and potential end users, because you might be working on a particular use case, but the solutions that you bring forward could be used actually in different contexts. So let us take a look at those three aspects actually in a little bit more detail. And the first aspect is, of course, the dual use item itself and the regulations around it. In this context, it's very important to be aware of the fact that there is a dual use regulation which has been produced by the European Union. Actually, all member states have to follow this dual use regulation, so it's quite important to be aware of the existence. And so this dual regulation focuses actually on items that include software technology, which could have both civil and military purposes. And it will also include items that relate to nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons, or supporting technology actually in assisting the use or the manufacturing of this kind of weapons. What is also important to understand that this regulation is not only applying on physical goods, so products that have been generated, concrete research results, but that also is applicable on software and technology, and particularly also on knowledge. So it's also the knowledge that you generate that is subjected actually to this dual use regulation. So that doesn't need to be necessarily a physical instantiation. So it can be in the form of reports and so on as well, and information exchanged in that way that is actually falling under these dual use regulations. Is of course not only the sole regulation that exists, there are also national and regional regulations. There are the regulations of other countries that can be important as well. I put here the example of a case where you maybe are re-exporting, that's typically more for companies of course, but re-exporting US products, but it could be also US knowledge we have access to in a research project, and then via another research project that you actually are re-exporting that knowledge to another country, which might be, for example, in a country where you cannot export this US-related knowledge to because of the US regulations. So if you're in such a situation, it's always important also to check, okay, what the regulations are in the country of origin of this dual-use item. So be aware of that. And so this is also often important when you're collaborating with partners that are in that situation, company or strategic research centers that have a lot of contracts with, for example, the US, but it can also be with other countries. Now, when you dive deeper in these regulations, and on the slide there is a link, we'll distribute the slides later on so you can consult the links and take a look at the regulation. You will find actually in the appendix of the regulation all the categories of dual use items to which actually this regulation is applying. You see the list here. I'm not going to go into detail through this list, but these are the typical items that are listed. And so if you are doing research or you have a project running, okay, that it's actually related to one of those items, you should certainly take a look in the list and check what is explicitly mentioned on those items. I'm particularly going to give you a few examples. Besides that, you will also see, so for each of the categories, there is actually a separation in 4 sections. There is a section that relates more to like complete systems, equipments, and components. There is also a section that relates to test, inspection, and product equipment, to materials, to software, and to technology. And so they have specific specifications there, what you should take into account when you are using items from that list, and whether they are subjected to export regulations. Now, I don't want to go in a lot of detail here, but just to show you how, I wanted to show you how this is formulated. So, for example, here this is in the section focusing on electronics, a domain I know quite well, and this relates to a particular type of circuits that are used a lot in electronics. These are analog to digital converters or digital to analog converters. And so you will notice when you go to through this list that for a lot of items, okay, it's not just mentioned, you're not allowed, okay, to just export without any approval analog to digital converters, digital to analog converters. No, most often you will find a more precise specification of which type of those converters are subjected to actually this export regulation. Because these are then typically kind of components, okay, that have a higher precision, that can work at extremely high data rates if you look at these converter circuits. Or to give you another example, it is in the computer section. So this here is relating to for example, computers that can operate in radiation harsh environments. Okay, and then it will specify explicitly, okay, what is then the radiation dose and so on, under which actually this computer should still be operational. So every computer that is not falling into this category will not fall under the export regulation. So it's important when you have items, you're doing research and you have items that are potentially on the list, okay, to do a search on the list, you can easily do that. So these documents are online, you just search in a document for certain terminology, and you try to you check whether this terminology is actually there, and then you can check whether this also relates to the aspects you are working on. It's quite important to do this if you are doing research related to one of those items. So once more, it's important to stress here. So this transfer of goods is also related to intangible goods, so knowledge. So it means everything that you're sharing along electronic media or even sharing verbally is actually subject to this regulation. So be aware of that. It's not because it's a mistake that's often made. No. That this only relates to really physical goods. That's not the case. It can also be necessary in some circumstances. Now, I think it's highly unlikely that we're running into this. There might be some exceptional cases, But if you export in the European Union and you relate to highly sensitive items, then also you need to ask for an export regulation. It can be related with stealth technology for airplanes and ships and so forth, or cryptanalysis technology and so forth. So be aware of that. Also, providing technical assistance outside the EU can actually make that you are actually falling under those regulations, because at that moment, if you provide technical assistance, whether it's training for repair or providing instructions or manufacturing, okay, still you might be subjected to this regulation, so you have to be aware of it. And then finally, an important one, I think, and so this is something that happens a lot at the universities, is that if you have, the regulation says, if you have persons which are temporarily residing in the EU, so this relates also, for example, to PhD students, postdoctoral researchers, and so forth, and you're sharing, you want to share sensitive information to that's on the dual use regulation list, okay, you have to assess also, okay, what is the person's background? Okay, that means what is the institute the person is maybe evaluated, connected with, or company. Okay, what is the background of that company, or what are the plans of the person, and try to assess the risks. It's very important here. We're speaking here always about a risk assessment. So there can be a risk, but the risk can be low that it happens. The risk can be high. Then there's the impact of that risk. Okay, what is the consequence? Okay, if something effectively is leaked or goes wrong, okay, how large is that impact? So it's the global picture we're looking at here. So it's not like hard-coded, there is a risk, okay, it is not allowed. It means if there is a risk, okay, you can check which measures can you take to actually reduce that risk and the impact actually of that risk. What is also important here in the assessment is what is the technology readiness level. So typically it's accepted, okay, that fundamental research results do not require a license. So what do we mean with fundamental research results? These are results which are situated at the levels 1 and 2. So basically these are focusing on basic principles observed, technology concept formulated, but there is not yet an experiment carried out in the lab, or a very primary experiment, or there is no technology validation. So in principle, okay, then you will not be subjected to this. Yes, but you always have to be careful, because it might be that you somewhere, or in part of your research, you're descending, or you're going to higher, descending, you're going up to higher technology readiness levels, and then you might actually run into problems. If, for example, to support your fundamental scientific research, you make an experimental setup, or you want to do a validation in the lab, and there, in order to carry out the experiments, you need some technology components, okay, which are maybe not the focus of your research, but you need them, and they fall under the regulations, okay, then you have to also be very careful and check, okay, what you will do with the results afterwards, who will have access to those results, and so forth. So this tier level 3 to 4 is a little bit fuzzy, okay, it really depends on case by case, also on the funding source and so forth, what will need to be, whether you need to follow the regulations, yes or no. And in general, it's also accepted if you go from tier levels 5 and higher, and it is never considered to be research of fundamental level. Good. Besides the item itself, it's also important to look at the trajectory actually that these research results, if we speak in our context, or the products are going to follow. So you have to also be aware, okay, where is it going to end up? Through which hands is it going to go? And so in that context, for example, the EU sanction map is very important. So that refers to countries, but also individuals and companies, okay, that are on the embargo list, okay, and so as sanctions. And so that means that you cannot collaborate with them. So that's an important additional item that has to be taken into account. So in that context, it's very important to know your research partner or the persons that are involved in your research. Even if it's running only one institute, it's still important to know what's the background of your collaborators in a particular project, and okay, what is the intention, what is the of the use actually of the knowledge. So in that context, it's also important to know, if you look to the end user or end users, that, for example, FAO excludes actually collaborations at this moment with Russian and Belarusian institutes. And for example, also with collaboration with Chinese institutes belonging to the 7 Sons of Defense. So particularly for China, if you want to know whether there are potential risks involved or not, it makes sense to look to the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, so the ASPI tracker, and that can provide you information about whether these institutes are belonging to the 7 Zones of Defense, or whether there are important labs in those institutes which are linked with the industrial military complex. So that's kind of important information you can use to assess the risks actually in the context of a particular collaboration. What's also important is, okay, when you're developing things, whether it's physical goods or software or knowledge or technology, and you share it with the end user, okay, whether they could be used, for example, for chemical, biological, nuclear weapons, or for missiles that can be used in the context of delivering weapons to their targets, for military end use, and so forth. So always make this assessment whether there could be potential use actually of your results in that context. This also relates, for example, to cyber surveillance related items. Check also whether there could be no violations actually, for example, of human rights, or whether there could be domestic repression actually supported by what you're offering actually as knowledge or items actually to the other party. And yet again, it's important for you as a researcher to inform yourself about potential risk, okay, to carefully screen it, use the information sources that I've been mentioning in this call, in this presentation. So try to create some awareness if you start collaborating with unknown partners where you're not aware originally of potential risks. And of course, the ethics committee and the other departments of the university can support you in that exercise. There are some exceptions to license requirements. We call that decontrol. And so dual use software that typically does not require an export license, when that software is a commercial product that is already generally available to the public, or it was not designed for installation without substantial assistance from the supplier. So these softwares fall aside. Now, a mistake that is often made is thinking, okay, I'm going to do research, and I'm going to create open source software, and in that way, I avoid a conflict with the dual use regulations. That is not true. Okay, so this exception only allows the software that is already open source the moment that you start your partnership and your research. Yes. If it was not open source yet, you will be still following on the dual use regulations. So that's important to understand that. These two first bullets, they do not apply for nuclear dual use items, to be clear. Okay, and then this is also not valid. And another exception is when is export of minimum object code. So that's really very minimal code that is actually necessary for installation, operation, maintenance, or repair of goods. So, but important is here the open software, because this is something that is used a lot in university environments. Be aware of, okay, that the software should be existing before you start your research and publicly available. But that's okay, part of the definition of open source. Good. Then finally, there is misuse of research. So here we really think about misusing your research results in the context of crime or terrorism. Weapons like chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapons. For example, surveillance technology, which I mentioned already, that could actually impact human rights or the freedom of citizens. And then all kinds of solutions that actually would lead to the fact that minorities or vulnerable groups would be stigmatized, discriminated, or intimidated. So it's important to be aware that these are potential misuses. Also think about AI technologies in this context. So the European AI Act becomes also quite important in this context of misuse. And also use the Human Rights Watch actually to find out if you're collaborating with partners that are maybe could have let's say bad intentions actually with respect to using those research results. So misuse is really something you look at primarily from a purely ethical perspective. So to conclude, I want to pinpoint you here to the website actually of the ethics committee, which we can find via the R&D SharePoint. So we'll share this link also with you. So on there, basically, you can find all the information related to the ethics committee, some guidelines, also a template that you have to complete that will allow you to actually start a file with the committee. So it contains a number of questions that allows us to actually find out and understand better what you're exactly intending to do and who the end users are, what the trajectories are, and so forth. You'll find on this page also a list of members of the committee. So this is typically a committee which is composed out of people coming from different disciplines, so with different backgrounds. Also, quite a few people with a juridical background are actually member of this committee, and then from the different technical domains and research domains, you will find also participants. What is very important, okay, and we cannot stress this enough, is that you have to consult timely the ethics committee and or R&D, TTO or IRMO. When you're even from the moment that you're planning to start a project and there is a potential risk that you are getting into or that you will be subjected actually to the dual use regulations or that there is potential misuse, start your file in time. Too many times, okay, that these files are intercepted, okay, just before submission of the project proposal, or sometimes even when it started already. And then it becomes quite painful if you have to make some advices to change the proposal, or in the worst case, it doesn't happen too much, but it happens. In the worst case, have to stop actually the project. So do this in time, okay? It's important for you, the project, your partners, and so on, that we can see the file in time, that we can give you some advice, maybe to avoid some of the risks or to mitigate the risks and so forth. Yes. So this is a very important message for all of you. And now finally, okay, I would also like to refer, because part of the document, the presentation was based on this document, is a very good document that has been published by De Vlier last year, that contains guidelines on dual use and misuse of research. It's an interesting document, so if you're getting into an area where you would be subjected to this screening, I would really advise consulting this document. It's not a very long one, but it gives you a good, quite and holds actually to know what to do. Good, and so this concludes also my overview, and I would like to give the floor now to my colleague, Alexander Matelaar. I'll stop sharing my presentation.
Thank you very much, Peter. I hope you can all see the new presentation that I have started sharing.
We do.
Thank you for confirming. As you can hear, I'm struggling with a nasty cold, so I hope my voice will last. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Alexander Matelaar. I'm Peter's deputy at the ECDMM committee. I'm actually a social scientist specialized in foreign security and defense policy matters. I'm also the chair of the scientific committee of the Royal Higher Institute for Defence. That is the scientific body that ranks projects for Belgian defense related funding. And what I want to do in the short presentation that I have prepared for you is to essentially zoom out a bit and explain why we are all as scientists being becoming actually faced with what I have labeled the comeback of defense technological research at knowledge institutions such as the university that we all belong to. By way of structuring this presentation, I'll first talk a bit about the broader paradigm shift in which defense as a function of the state has made a dramatic comeback. Because if we are talking more about defense-related research, it is because defense establishments in Europe and for that matter also elsewhere in the world are by and large again in a growth trajectory after several decades of being downsized, of being neglected. In essence, states are concerned that there is a prospect for war in the future, and in some respects, depending on where you go, war has of course already broken out. So states are responding by reinvigorating their defense establishments. Defense establishments pursue technological advantage, therefore start pouring money into R&D, research and technology that is happening in Europe at the European level with the European Defence Fund. That is also happening at the level of the individual member states of the European Union. In the Belgian context, as we are a university in the Belgian capital, the most important developments in that respect have been the development of the so-called defense industrial research strategy and the defense-related action program. So the body of my presentation will zoom in on the presentation of those new funding frameworks that have come into being. And then I will wrap up, sort of linking everything I've said before to what Peter already talked about. So we exist as an ethics committee at VUB to deal with defense-related and dual-use research. I'd like to share some thoughts as to how we actually look at defense-related project applications, what kind of questions that generates, because this is also still a policy that is in development. But let me perhaps start with the very big picture, the geopolitical analysis that sort of supports this trend. By and large, we've all, except for those of you who are way older than me in this call, we are all children of the post-Cold War paradigm. So the Cold War was over, defense sort of faded away into the background, and defense establishments downsized. Basically, that historical era is now over, in the sense that in Eastern Europe there is of course a large-scale, high-intensity war being that is raging, that has been initiated by the Russian Federation against Ukraine. That actually already started in 2014 at a smaller level with the annexation of the Crimea, etc. And that war escalated in a big way last year. There are, of course, also other tensions elsewhere in the world, the conflict in the Middle East, growing tension over Taiwan in the Far East, and so on and so forth. But as far as the European picture is concerned, it is basically from 2014 onwards that European states and the NATO allies in particular start thinking about reinvigorating their defense establishments. In 2014, the NATO heads of state and government commit themselves to halt the decline in defense budgets and move towards 2% of GDP on defense spending, with also emphasis on burden sharing, etc. 3 years later, the European Union adds an important detail to that, namely that in the framework of the so-called permanent structured cooperation in defense, most EU member states commit themselves not just to rising defense budgets, but also to spend 2% of their defense budget on research and technology, also with a view to having more European defense industrial cooperation connecting all the different member states. Of course, as the war in Ukraine escalated last year, the military alliance that Belgium is part of, NATO, reinvigorated in a big way its deterrence and defense posture. So as we speak, there is de facto an operational system of collective defense that has been built up again in Eastern Europe, with essentially the border between NATO and Russia starting in the high north, Norway, Finland, and then all the way down to the Black Sea, becoming militarized. And it is now, I think, fairly straightforward that the relationship with Russia has cooled to sort of Cold War levels of trust. Even if the new international environment is not like the Cold War that we know from the history books, it is different in many respects, but in any case, we are faced with an international system characterized by a high degree of tension, with a risk of major war that can break out and expand. And of course, if you're living in Ukraine, you know that war is already there. Just translating this into some facts and figures, this graph visualizes the increase of defense expenditures in different NATO countries. It will not surprise you that, of course, in Eastern Europe, countries are much more concerned than in Western Europe. Poland is now close to 4% of GDP being spent on defense. Belgium is actually the laggard. Our Belgian defense budget has already gone up significantly in absolute terms, but compared to the European average, which is sort of what is the generally speaking the level of ambition of Belgian governments, we are way behind, which also gives you a good indication that it is not going to stop here. There is quite a bit of way to go in terms of increasing defense spending, and as a result also increasing defense research and technology spending. So let me turn to a quick overview of the defense research and technology instruments. In 2017, the European Union established the so-called European Defence Fund, which is basically a big envelope of money, 8 billion euros planned in the current multi-annual financial framework, to be spent on basically subsidizing the European defense sector, but specifically with a view to incentivizing greater collaboration and integration amongst defense industries in different European countries, so as to sort of overcome all European countries trying to do this separately in their own little corner and building their own material. The EDF came into being 3 years ago, so we are now already a couple of calls into that new system. What is important to note is that European Union funding often comes with a co-financing requirement, so member states still need to chip in additional funding. To that purpose, European member states are also creating new national instruments. In the Belgian case, this Belgian government has adopted the so-called Defence Industrial Research Strategy, DIRS, for which it has earmarked 1.8 billion euros from 2022 onwards to the end of the decade. That is not all R&T money, but also research and development money, co-funding for EDF projects, etc. To the extent that this actually concerns us as universities, it is mostly the R&T component that is noteworthy, in the sense that the Belgian government created its own defense research action program that is really specifically designed to sort of revitalize the Belgian knowledge base in defense technology and industry. So it's a funding instrument specifically designed for Belgian universities, research centers, all kinds of knowledge institutions that can then team up with industrial and private sector actors. The DEFRA program came into being slightly later, but also the first call came out in 2021. Just some examples thereof. This is a slide I got from a commission briefing on the EDF, summarizing all the themes for the EDF work program for 2023. The call has just closed. As you can see, the deadline for submission was the 22nd of November. There will, of course, be new calls in the coming years, but I'm just showing this to sort of highlight what kind of things actually are eligible for EDF funding. And as you can see, it's really all over the place: information security, sensors, cyber, digital transformation, energy, environment, but it goes all the way to air combat, naval combat, etc., etc. Turning for a second to the Belgian situation. So I said the Defence Industrial Research Strategy includes both an R&T leg as well as an R&D leg. It, through the R&D component, enables the co-financing of EDF projects, and we know that Belgian universities can also be part of EDF consortia. Actually, we know that there is at least one group also involved with a project application for the call in 2023 that I just showed you. But as far as R&T is concerned, the main instrument is really that DEFRA program. There is also a new program that is not fully in place yet, but under the umbrella of Belspo, there will be a new Science for Policy program being rolled out that sort of enables the Belgian government to commission studies on areas of selected interest. So those R&T instruments are really sort of meant to nurture the national knowledge base. DEFRA functions in accordance with annual calls. The next one will be released very early in January. It is currently awaiting the approval of the Belgian Council of Ministers. You can find more information about those DEFRA calls via the Belspo website, of which I have included the link. There is an information day that has already been scheduled for the 25th of January, so I assume that there will be lots of news in that field that is forthcoming in the weeks ahead. In the sort of budgetary overview at the bottom, you essentially see what a growth trajectory that is already foreseen for defense-related R&T. So last year, 2022, it was just 13 million euros. This year, it was already 22 million euros, and it sort of goes up with big hikes, big budget hikes upwards towards close to 160 million euros by the end of the decade for R&T alone. So there is also an opportunity in this respect, right? In the sense that this is one of the few funding sources that is operating on a growth trajectory. So let me now wrap up with some thoughts as to how VUB as a university community is positioning itself in this regard. The quote that you find on this slide is drawn from the decision that the Academic Council made in 2017. So in the run-up to the creation of what became the Ethics Committee for Dual-Use Military Research and Misuse. It states very clearly that VUB does not bar academics from working with the defense sector. So we can do defense-related research. There's no problem with that. However, and that comes second, there should be an ethical review. That is what is the job of the ethics committee. The ethics committee then weighs up benefits against risk. And in doing so, it is also paying lots of attention to the need to ensure due information security, because that, of course, relates to the misuse part, but also with it also relates to the risk of basically knowledge being disseminated to places where we would prefer it not to end up. So this paragraph basically codifies the core components of what is VUB policy. How do we then try and implement that? Well, basically, we take a case-by-case approach to evaluate and advise on individual projects. And Peter has already gone extensively over all the details thereof, but the bottom line is simple. If what you're doing is defense-oriented, defense-funded, if it sort of smells of dual-use technologies, if there is any risk of misuse, then probably it will require an ECDMM evaluation and advice. We actually don't have a practice of blocking a lot of things, but we do provide a lot of feedback, because that is also our informal function, right? To act as a sounding board for providing our research community with all kinds of recommendations in doing research on sensitive matters. Often those deal with ICT security, with considerations over knowledge security, what kind of international partnerships are acceptable and which are not acceptable, and so on and so forth. As far as it comes to evaluating research specifically on military technologies, we haven't had that many cases thereof, so this is still a policy that is sort of in evolution. Sort of a good example, I think, in the Belgian context is there is a lot of ongoing work on counter mine technologies taking place, because that is also a sort of niche area in which the Belgian Navy excels. There is a lot of work going on undersea mine warfare technologies. Several Belgian companies are involved, several Belgian universities are involved. So what kind of questions do we ask ourselves in thinking about whether there are ethical problems with military research? And this is just me speaking, because we haven't sort of developed a fully codified policy in that respect. But I think there are three big questions that could become problematic. And that is, basically, the first question is, do we really understand the technological possibilities and the long-term outcomes of the things that are being researched? Can we sort of guess what the long-term implications thereof are? Specifically in the field of artificial intelligence related research, there are a lot of things going on where it actually becomes very hard to still guess what would be the sort of long-term outcome for all of that. So that is then a red flag for perhaps leaning towards the side of prudence and not going ahead with things. Another question is, do we have clarity on the end user? Are we talking about defense technology that serves basically governments in the European Union, in NATO, or conceivably partners, but at least governments that are complying with international humanitarian law, that have a sort of healthy civil-military relationship at home, etc. that really means that we are really only contemplating defense-related research for, in essence, a rather small number of state establishments. Under DEFRA, of course, that's Belgian government that is actually encouraging its own universities to get involved. So that's okay. Given that there's a lot of European level cooperation through the EDF, that's probably also okay. There are also similar initiatives in NATO. That's then also okay. But we're probably reluctant to go much beyond that group of nations. Last but not least, there's the matter of trying to prevent harm as much as possible, at least to the extent that it actually is avoidable. That is also something that should be given preference, right? Because that is also a part of our formally agreed policy. So that is another consideration that will come up in trying to sort of weigh up the pros and cons of specific projects. I've spoken long enough, so I'll stop here and look forward to taking any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. So now there is time for questions. So as I mentioned before already, there's the Q&A button you can press, and then in that section you can enter questions. Okay, what you also can do, of course, is raise your hand if you have questions, and I will try to answer those questions as good as possible. So, are there questions? Checking both the people lists. And the question list. No questions. So then the two presentations must have been extremely clear. No. The hand raised. Okay. Isham Sali, please go ahead.
For this indeed clear and precise presentation, my question is related to the last bullet, avoiding harm. Could you give examples?
Actually, not really, because it hasn't come up yet. But given that there will be much more calls going forward, we expect that to become a more prominent issue in the future. It is not a theme that comes up as much in the dual use cases or in the misuse of research results conversations. It is something that will feature more prominently as there is being work taken forwards, specifically on defense technologies that involve lethality of systems. To the extent that you want a sort of more hypothetical example, in the counter mine warfare example that I gave, if you think about this, the traditional way of clearing up mines under the sea surface was by mine sweepers, so wooden military vessels that would cast a net, collect mines in a larger area, and then send divers into the water to either organize a controlled explosion or ensure that the mine does not detonate and can be safely disassembled. I mean, that was a relatively high risk endeavor also to the people doing it, right? The new countermine technologies are essentially about you have a ship that sends a fleet of unmanned drones underwater looking for the mines and basically neutralizing mines via robotics. So that actually minimizes harm because it is essentially relying on automatization to reduce risk to military personnel conducting the task. And in that sense, it would clearly qualify as something that sort of reduces the risk of harm.
Yeah, but also such a technology could be used for missile guidance, and there the harm is there.
To do what?
The same technology you have been mentioning about the, let's say, robots to disable mines could be used also for missile guidance.
Yes.
And there is also a question of harm.
Yes, but the matter of harm is not about avoiding all harm. It is about avoiding harm that is avoidable, and the decision about employing specific weapon systems, I mean, of course, is actually one that governments make. What we engage in is conducting research on technologies, and we want to effectively reflect on the ethical questions that relate to new technologies over older and existing technologies. We are not dealing with the ethical questions pertaining to the use of force, because that is not something that, I mean, that we decide, right? I mean, that is a matter for government.
So it's maybe important to stress also that, okay, if you look at the dual use regulations and so forth, of course, they control the export of goods that could be used for weapons and so forth, and for actually for support of missiles or the transport of those missiles of weapons and so forth. But it doesn't forbid it. Okay, it basically states that, okay, within a particular region or between certain countries, certain regulations that have to be respected. Okay, and that's what is stated there. And so that also, okay, applies to the defense calls that we will have and the projects running in that context. So it is not forbidden. Of course, it's always a decision that you have to take as an institute. How far do you want to go with that? But the example you give here, for example, for the missile guidance, so these technologies will also be used in other civil applications as well. So that question might pop up also when you're working on a civil application. There will be also potential other uses of those technologies, but that doesn't exclude actually that research could be carried out. So you will always assess the risk, and one of the important parts in there is, okay, what is the partnership? Okay, who are the other partners in the consortium? Okay, what is the expected primal end use? This will be criteria taken into account to make a final assessment. But so far, and so this is an exercise where every research institute is going through right now, is that most of the military research, and particularly at VUB, of the years they have been screening military research, there wasn't so much till now, which is also not so surprisingly given the low amount of funding. But all of the research that we have been screening was related with more than the pure defense-related aspects. Think about demining activities, think about designing protective shields for buildings and vehicles, in a war zone and so forth. So where the major actually goal was actually to protect rather than to attack. But the question is, of course, okay, what will happen within those calls? It's very hard to assess that. And so that will be for sure something that we will have to learn on the way, where also the university has to take positions where they want to go, and not so. It's not purely only a task of the ethical committee there. In the end, the ethical committee is an advisory committee. It's important to understand that. The final decision is not taken by the ethical committee. But we look at it from all potential angles with the experts that are available in the committee.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. I see there's another question or another hand that is being raised by Mimi Depré.
Do you hear me, Peter?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Thank you for all those interesting questions. Actually, I would like to refer to your first question. Now in AI, there are a lot of things going on, and then you said it's hard to guess the long-term consequences. So you also said that the ethical committee would give a red flag for not going ahead. But my question is, currently I see that the EU is really encouraging to have proposals linked to AI. So do we not take a risk of running behind then, or being too late with all the research, which we cannot do then?
Maybe I can give it a start, Alexander, and then you can continue. So first of all, the AI Act, okay, is not forbidding, to my understanding, and I have to admit also that I didn't read it carefully yet, but from what I have been reading about the Act, it's not forbidding the use of AI technologies or the development of the AI technologies, particularly looking to what the use will be.
Yes.
So AI technology is a very generic technology in the end. So, okay, yeah. I'm coming a bit from the area of signal processing and so forth, which is also a generic technology that can be used for a lot of purposes. And so it's not because it can be used for a lot of purposes, you're going to be forbid to do research on the technologies and to further development. The question is, for what are you going to use them? Okay. Yeah. So there is, of course, a potential for misuse of those technologies. But at the same time, there are many more examples of where this technology can be used for the good. And so it's finding the balance, and as a society, protect yourself for actually misusing the technology. And I think that's where the AI Act is about to do that. Okay, and that's also what we look into when we are screening proposals around AI technologies. We'll be screening, okay, what is the intended use? What is the partnership? Because that's often the problem. It's such the intended use. Most of the time there is no problem. It's okay, who are the partners? Okay, and what are the risks associated with the partners? Okay, and the trajectory that's going to be followed. These are typically the aspects that are giving more problems in the evaluation or raising more questions and concerns than actually the technology itself. Okay, it can be on the dual items list and so forth, but then the question is also what is going to happen afterwards. It's there where the questions are typically being posed, and that will be the same for AI technologies. So we will have the same issue there. That the end use, that will be important, and who are the people that can put their hands on the technology.
I'll just complement that. So just for the record, I was not saying that fundamental AI research or AI technologies tied to civilian applications would necessarily be problematic. That is not.
Yeah. Sure.
I was specifically talking about AI technologies in defense applications, which is a very vibrant field, but it is a field in which also the military lawyers realize that it is it raises all kinds of very, very problematic questions. The Belgian government, the Belgian defense establishment is also trying to process that, but has not agreed upon an AI policy of any sort yet. So as a result, we are not doing that, even with the defense funding of DEFRA, etc. There we are consciously, but that is not at VUBA. We are, for the moment, consciously staying clear of that because it hasn't been really thought through. And actually, there is an ongoing conversation. Can you think it through to the end? But to the extent that we have an idea of what other countries are doing, specifically in terms of leveraging targeting processes through artificial intelligence. It fills many people with a sense of deep foreboding and a strong preference not to go there.
So, but we get a red flag.
I mean, as far as Belgian-funded defense research is concerned, there will not be anything for now. It will be stuff that will be looked at very carefully. But I'm talking specifically about AI applications in defense technologies. Huh?
Yeah. Thank you.
In kinetic defense technologies in particular.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, we go to the ethical committee for sure for advice. Huh? That's for sure. Yeah.
Okay, I see this topic is triggering some questions because I see several hands raised. So, Matthias Hansen, I think you were the first one raising your hand, so give the floor to you.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Can you?
Yes, we can hear you. No.
Okay, good. So my question also, well, it's more tangential, I guess, but the presentation here focuses on military applications, but what if one were to cooperate with the Justice Department and try to train machine learning models on their data? Would that require ethical consent, and is there a specific committee? I know it's not exactly the same, but I'm drawing some parallels between the topics. So yeah, that's it. Thanks.
Well, it would, if I may, so I think it can relate to multiple ethical committees. Of course, we have an ethical committee that is looking into GDPR-related aspects. So it depends really what is the purpose of this effort. So that could be handled there. On the other hand, there is also potential of misuse in this context. So in that sense, it falls under this committee. So it will be decided if it's like some project that is on the edge of between two ethical committees. So the people from those committees, they will help you deciding where to go. So I cannot give immediately an answer. Okay, it will go to this particular one. So the advantage is typically that in the ethical committee on dual use and so forth, we have quite a few technology experts present on different types of technologies. While this is less the case on the committee that goes over the GDPR-related aspect, because it's more related to social sciences and it's more how do you handling, okay, the privacy-related personal information, privacy-related information, and so forth. So it depends a little bit which expertise is exactly needed to look into the proposal. It might also that it's decided that the two committees have to give their opinion on
okay. Thanks.
So it's very hard. Let's say we have to look to the concrete cases, I think, in this particular, and there is an overlap between responsibilities.
Yeah, okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Excellent. And then we have Celine Drieskens who raised her hand. So Celine.
Yes, hi.
Yes.
I'm doing research between the VUB and the KU Leuven. And I read in a public letter from the Dean of the KU Leuven, Luc Sels, yesterday, that he announced that ECDMM from the KU Leuven has been asked in November to review ongoing collaborations with Israeli institutes, universities, and companies, especially with a view to making like a clear policy decision regarding future collaborations, and that this evaluation is currently underway. And given I understood from your presentation, Alexander, that a fully codified policy with regards to defense research hasn't really been fully developed at the VUB, I wanted to know what the ongoing conversations or discussions are in that regard, if there are any. Thank you.
We are looking at it. The fact is there isn't much such cooperation to begin with. So actually, it is a relatively void conversation from a technical point of view, at least.
But it's also, I think, a nice illustration, okay, of how actually situations can shift, and that's one of the uncertainties. Not because you get an ethical approval in 2019, but actually still that project would be acceptable to have it running in 2023 because of the fact that the geopolitical situation changed, the positioning of the international partners might be different, and then projects can actually become problematic. So it's always also when an evaluation is done, there should be an assessment. Also, it should be part of the assessment. Is part of the assessment. Okay, in the risk assessment. Okay, what could happen? Okay, is this a wise thing to do? Yes or not to start this collaboration? And if we do so, okay, how do we actually kind of mitigate the risks and reduce the impact if something would go wrong? But of course, this is something that you cannot always control, and situations can change over time. And what, of course, all the universities have been doing in this particular context is screening actually what are the ongoing projects, which collaborations are there, what are they exactly doing, and then the appropriate decisions. And so, as far as I know, also the VUB, there were no really proposals also that projects that were ongoing that were actually flagged in this context. But it's not particularly the ethical committee that actually screens again at VUB level, actually those proposals. It's in the administration on screening the proposals. And if there would be an issue, then that of course it would send back to the ethical committee, and the question could be asked to screen this proposal again and provide an advice. But so far we were not asked to rescreen actual proposals at the moment. So, are there any more questions? Because we are a little bit over time, but if there are other questions to be asked, if you want to ask, please go ahead. If not, then I would propose that we wrap up here. I would like to thank you all for your attendance. If questions pop up, you can always send them later on as well. And project-related questions, of course, they can go to the ethical committee or the administration. And so I hope it was an interesting session for you, that it has clarified a few things. And I guess the most important message I can only give you is, if you think there is a risk, okay, that you are have a project or research ongoing that is in conflict or relating to some dual use regulations, or there is potential misuse, or there might be an issue with the partnership, please consult us. Okay, we are there especially to support you. So we're not there at the end of the trajectory to give a yes or a no. We are there. We should be there from an early phase actually to help you and to steer the project in the right direction, if there would be issues, of course. Good. Then I would like to thank you all and conclude here.
Thanks a lot, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Bye all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.